In 1959, Holcomb had a population of under 300, making it likely that every family in the town knew one another. The Clutters were recognized in the community as a respectable and upstanding family. Herbert Herb Clutter, born on May 24, 1911, was a successful farmer in the western region of Kansas and was a graduate of Kansas State University. He was a dedicated member and active fundraiser for the First United Methodist Church of Garden City. His professional roles included serving as a county extension agent, the chairman of the Kansas Conference of Farm Organizations, and a member of the Federal Farm Credit Board. Herb Clutter was a prominent figure in the Holcomb community where he resided with his family. His older daughters, Eviana and Beverly, had already moved out and started their own lives. Herb Clutter came from humble beginnings and built River Valley Farm into a prosperous and successful business. His specialty was wheat cultivation, and he implemented cutting-edge methods to enhance the growth of wheat and other crops. His innovative strategies garnered attention from prominent media outlets such as Edward R. Murrow's See It Now and the New York Times. One notable example of Clutter's creativity was his cost-saving initiative of leasing drilling rights to gas companies to reduce irrigation expenses. By charging royalties to these companies, he established a mutually beneficial arrangement where they assisted in extracting water beneath his land. In a 2009 Guardian article, Holcomb resident Bob Rupp was quoted as saying, "He was a big influence in my life. When you know somebody like that, it tends to kind of inspire you. He could see above what most people could see and visualize how things should be." Herb employed up to 18 farmhands and was reputedly admired and respected by past employees for his equitable treatment and fair wages. In a tragic turn of events, Clutter's success and sterling reputation indirectly led to his demise. This was due to misinformation shared by a former employee by the name of Floyd Wells. His wife, Bonnie, was a member of the local garden club and was also allegedly battling clinical depression and physical health issues, a claim that was later disputed. The youngest Clutters, Nancy, aged 16, and Kenyon, aged 15, were students at Holcomb High School. Nancy Clutter, the third child and youngest daughter of the Clutter family, was a junior at Holcomb High School, known for her academic excellence. In addition to her studies, she was a clarinet player in the school band. Nancy was a popular and outgoing young lady who regularly attended church and was an active participant in the 4-H club. Her hobbies included horseback riding, baking, needlepoint, music, and sewing. She was often approached by younger girls seeking her assistance with domestic skills such as cooking and baking, or for help with their music lessons. Kenyon Clutter, the youngest child and only son of Bonnie and Herb, was a sophomore in high school. He was a quiet, bespectacled young man with interests in hunting, woodworking, and working on an old pickup truck that his father had permitted him to purchase, despite not yet having a driver's license. Like his sister Nancy, Kenyon was also an active member of the local 4-H club. The night of November 15, 1959, etched a dark chapter in American history, and the tranquil rural setting of Holcomb, Kansas, was shattered by a devastating event. The nation bore witness to a chilling event that would forever intertwine the phrase, in cold blood, with the Clutter family massacre. Perry Edward Smith, born on October 27, 1928, had a tumultuous upbringing in Huntington, Nevada. His parents, Florence Buckskin and John Smith, were rodeo performers of mixed Irish and Cherokee descent. In 1929, the Smith family relocated to Juneau, Alaska, where Smith's father earned a living by distilling illicit whiskey. The father was known to be abusive towards his wife and their 4 children. Consequently, in 1935, his wife decided to leave him, taking their children with her to San Francisco. Smith and his siblings were initially raised by their alcoholic mother. When he was just 13 years old, his mother passed away. Following her death, Smith and his siblings were placed in a Catholic orphanage. It was here that Smith was allegedly subjected to physical and emotional abuse by the nuns due to his persistent issue of bedwetting. Smith was also placed in a Salvation Army orphanage, where he was allegedly subjected to a near-drowning incident by a caretaker. During his teenage years, Smith reconnected with his father and led a nomadic lifestyle. His life took a turn for the worse when he got involved in minor criminal activities, leading to his time in various juvenile detention homes. Smith's father relocated to Cold Springs, Nevada, where he lived until he was 92. He ended his life by suicide, reportedly due to his deteriorating health. Two of Smith's siblings also committed suicide in their early adulthood, and the remaining sister severed all ties with him. At the age of 16, Smith enlisted in the United States Merchant Marine. He later joined the Army in 1948 and served during the Korean War. His time in the Army was marked by frequent stints in the stockade due to public misconduct and altercations with Korean civilians and fellow soldiers. Despite his record, Smith was honorably discharged in 1952 and was last stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington. He resided with an Army friend in the Tacoma area for a while, where he worked as a car painter. Smith's life took another tragic turn when he lost control of his newly purchased motorbike due to inclement weather. The accident left him with severe injuries to both legs, leading to permanent disability and chronic leg pain. To manage the pain, he was known to consume large quantities of aspirin. Despite only having a grade school education, Smith had a keen interest in art, literature, and music. He was an avid reader, and during his time on death row, he wrote poems and painted pictures for other inmates using photos of their family members. While researching for his novel, In Cold Blood, Truman Capote conducted extensive interviews with Smith and eventually formed a friendship with him. The nature of their relationship has been a subject of speculation and rumors. Although Capote never suggested anything beyond a platonic friendship, some accounts have hinted at a deeper connection. Richard Hickok, born on June 6, 1931, was originally from Kansas City, Kansas, and was born to farm worker parents. He excelled as a student and athlete at Olathe High School, and he had harbored aspirations of securing a college football scholarship. Hickok was recognized for his above-average intelligence and athletic abilities, yet he struggled as a student due to a lack of discipline. Despite his talents, he fell short of obtaining the desired scholarship and instead worked in various roles such as a railroad worker, auto mechanic, and ambulance driver. Following two unsuccessful marriages, a serious car accident in 1950 resulted in permanent facial scarring for Hickok. Subsequently, he faced legal issues related to writing bad checks and minor thefts. In March 1958, Hickok received a 5-year prison sentence at the state penitentiary in Lansing, Kansas for burglarizing a home in Johnson County, where he met Smith. While his prison record remained clean, authorities deemed him as, quote, not dangerous, unquote. Reports suggest that Hickok had deviant tendencies, as described by Truman Capote in his book In Cold Blood. While incarcerated, Hickok and Smith shared a cell in Lansing for 2 weeks. And after Hickok became cellmates with Floyd Wells at Lansing, he learned about Wells' criminal past involving stealing lawnmowers from an electrical appliance store. Wells shared details about his former job as a farmhand for Herb Clutter at River Valley Farm in Holcomb, Kansas, mentioning a safe in Clutter's home office that held a significant amount of cash. Upon hearing this information, Hickok expressed his intention to team up with Smith once he was released on parole to rob the Clutters. He told Wells the following, quote, as soon as I get out on parole, I'm going to find me some transportation, get a hold of Smith, and go to the Clutters and see if there's still $10,000 in their damned safe, unquote. He persistently probed Wells about the Clutter family, their ages, and the layout of their house, declaring his plan to kill the family without leaving any witnesses. After being recently paroled from Kansas State Penitentiary, Hickok and Smith concocted their plan, which was fueled by greed. They devised a plan to steal the safe that, unbeknownst to them, did not exist, as Herb Clutter conducted all his business transactions by check. They were hoping to use the stolen money to start a new life in Mexico. The book In Cold Blood highlights Hickok's confidence in the plan, referring to it as, quote, a cinch, the perfect score, unquote. On the night of November 14, 1959, Hickok and Smith departed Olathe in a borrowed 1949 Chevy, opting for a long and indirect path to Holcomb. After covering 400 miles and spending several hours on the road, they arrived in Garden City and made a stop at the Phillips 66 gas station. Continuing their journey, they reached the vicinity of the Clutter residence close to midnight, following a dirt road that led them to the house. When a light flickered in a nearby residence, Hickok briefly hesitated and turned the car around, only to have Smith response the following, quote, maybe you think I ain't got the guts to do it alone, but by God, I'll show you who's got guts, unquote. Parking near a side entrance, the two intruders quietly entered through an unlocked door as the Clutter family slept. Armed with a knife and a shotgun, Hickok and Smith navigated the dark and quiet residence with the help of a flashlight, searching for the rumored safe. However, their search of a small paneled office yielded nothing, leading them to continue their search. As they continued through the house, they did not care about the noise they were making. Their search took a turn when Herb Clutter woke up from his sleep by a flashlight beam and found himself face to face with the intruders. Intent on stealing the contents of a non-existent safe, Hickok and Smith held Clutter at gunpoint and escorted him to his office, where he insisted that he conducted all financial transactions via checks and did not possess a safe. In a desperate bid for peace, Clutter offered to write them a check and surrender the contents of his wallet in exchange for his family's safety. As the night unfolded, the Clutter family began to awaken. What followed was a nightmarish ordeal as Hickok and Smith terrorized the family, spreading fear and violence throughout the home. Hickok and Smith directed Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon to a bathroom on the second floor, while leading Herb to his office on the first floor. After their unsuccessful search for a safe, they brought back the remaining family members from the bathroom. Bonnie was restrained with her hands in front of her, gagged and placed on a bed in a second-floor bedroom. Nancy had her hands tied behind her but was left ungagged, then tucked into a bed. Subsequently, Herb and Kenyon were taken to the basement, where Kenyon was initially bound with his hands behind his back, and he was gagged and tied the rope to an overhead steam pipe in the furnace room. Subsequently, they made the decision to release him, relocating him to the adjacent playroom. Despite being restrained and silenced, they positioned him at a slanted angle on the compact sofa, inserting a white pillow behind his head, presumably with the intention of enhancing his comfort. Herb was also bound and gagged and positioned on a mattress in the basement, while Smith remained downstairs as Hickok resumed searching for the safe upstairs. Finally, the intruders restrained Herb, silencing him with a gag and forcing him onto a mattress box situated on the cold concrete floor of the furnace room. Smith remained in the furnace room to keep watch over Herb, while Hickok returned back upstairs to continue searching for the safe. Shortly after, Hickok, filled with disappointment and rage, returned to the basement after failing to locate a safe. The duo had previously decided to leave no survivors and briefly deliberated on their next course of action. Smith was known for his occasional instability and propensity for violent outbursts, and he egged on Hickok to use the knife on Herb Clutter, and Hickok appeared unable to do so. Smith then proceeded to snatch the knife from Hickok and proceeded to slit Herb Clutter's throat, and urging Hickok to, quote, finish him off, unquote, but Hickok seemed either hesitant or unable to do so. Ultimately, Smith shot Clutter from close range as Hickok illuminated the scene with a flashlight. In the ensuing moments, Smith and Hickok made their way back to the playroom where Smith fatally shot Kenyon. They then ascended to the upper levels of the house, eventually reaching the second floor. Upon entering Nancy's room, they shot her dead. Their final act was to shoot Bonnie Clutter on the side of her head. Each of the 4 victims was killed by a single shotgun blast to the head. The murderers made sure to collect each spent shell. In a later recounting of the night's horrific events, Smith alleged that he had prevented Hickok from sexually assaulting Nancy. After the brutal murder of all 4 members of the Clutter family, Hickok and Smith quickly left the scene of the crime, taking belongings such as a Zenith portable radio that belonged to Kenyon Clutter, a pair of binoculars from Herb Clutter, and less than $50 in cash. This cash was believed to be the remaining amount from a $60 check that Herb Clutter had cashed the previous day. His wallet and several other items were discovered strewn around his ground floor bedroom, but no cash was found in the room. In total, 2 hours were spent in the house. Herbert Clutter died at the age of 48, and his wife Bonnie Clutter died at the age of 45. Their daughter Nancy died at the age of 16, and their son Kenyon died at the age of 15. Hours later, a friend of 16-year-old Nancy discovered the Clutter family's bodies, prompting a call to the police from a neighbor's residence. By 10 a.m., the sheriff and officers from Garden City had arrived to investigate the gruesome scene at the farmhouse. The house quickly filled with additional law enforcement personnel, the Kansas City Bureau of Investigation, medical professionals, a minister, journalists, and photographers. Alvin Dewey, who had formed a friendship with Herb over time, assembled his task force at the KBI to track down the individuals responsible for his friend's murder, and collaborated with various government agencies to gather evidence. Dewey's team of 18 diligently pursued leads, interviewing employees and acquaintances of the family. They spoke with schoolmates, teachers, maintenance workers, Bonnie's doctor, and neighbors. A reward was offered for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The team only paused briefly to attend the funerals of the 4 family members. Around 1,000 individuals attended the funeral of the Clutter family, filling the First Methodist Church to capacity. A significant portion of these attendees also paid their respects at the burial in Valley View Cemetery. Despite the severity of their facial injuries, all the caskets were open, with cotton concealing their faces to minimize the visible damage. The graves of the parents are centrally located, identified by a shared headstone. Adjacent to this, on the left, is Nancy's grave with a single headstone, while Kenyon's grave is positioned just to the right. During the investigation, Row Leader, a skilled photographer, captured photographs of the crime scene. After developing the photos from the crime scene, the team stumbled upon a significant finding. When examined under ultraviolet light, a distinct boot print was visible in the images. As all the victims were barefoot at the time of the murders, it was deduced that the print must have belonged to the perpetrator. However, the boot type was common, and without further evidence, there was little actionable information to follow up on. Despite this breakthrough, the police chose to withhold this evidence from the public, preserving it for potential use in the ongoing investigation. Additionally, a photo was taken of a tire track hastily left by the perpetrators. Meanwhile, as friends combed through the property to create an inventory of missing items, they noticed that Bonnie's jewelry remained untouched, and the house showed no signs of ransacking. Although a transistor radio was reported missing, with no items of monetary value gone, progress in the case stalled. It wasn't until a few weeks later, close to Christmas, that Alvin Dewey received crucial news from his colleague Logan Sanford, the KBI director in Topeka. Floyd Wells had come forward, claiming to know the identity of the killers. He offered this information in exchange for the reward money and an early release from prison. The following statement is made by Floyd Wells to Agent Wayne Owens of the KBI on December 10, 1959, and is taken from the original unpublished case notes. Quote, "I spent considerable time with him, Herb Clutter, in his office where he had a desk and I believe a safe. This was the old house where the Clutters lived in 1949, also located on the Clutter farm property. This was just about the time their new house was completed. I distinctly remember Mr. Clutter paying a large lumber bill and I thought he paid it in cash with money from the safe. The reason I remember is because Mr. Clutter made the remark to me that evening when we left his den that he'd paid out more than $10,000 that day. After entering Kansas State, I celled with Dick Hickok. Hickok said he liked Western Kansas and maybe would try to get a job with the Clutters. I described the location of the house. I suspect I talked too much about the money Mr. Clutter had. Hickok talked a lot about Perry Smith. Said after they got out of the joint they could pull some jobs to get enough money for a down payment on a boat. They would run a charter service for deep-sea fishermen and eventually make contacts and use the boat to bring in narcotics. I didn't believe Hickok, but he kept talking about it. I tried to talk him out of it, said he would get caught. But he said he had a plan, and after the robbery would kill everyone there and leave no witnesses," unquote. Floyd later met a tragic fate himself during a prison break in Mississippi, where he killed himself. After robbing the Clutter home of meager possessions and precious lives, Hickok and Smith fled the scene, leaving behind a shattered community. The men fled to the Kansas City area and began writing fraudulent checks. When their welcome wore out, they decided to escape to Mexico for a brief period. In Mexico, they pawned the stolen binoculars before hitchhiking through California en route to Omaha, Nebraska. Following a short stay in Omaha, they traveled to Iowa, where they stole a car and returned to Kansas City. Their journey continued to Florida and Nevada. After running the license plates of the vehicle they were driving, local police discovered that it had been reported stolen in Iowa. Subsequently, the men were apprehended and charged with car theft, and upon their capture in Nevada, the stolen car they were driving had incriminating evidence. The KBI and Alvin Dewey were informed that the individuals responsible for the Clutter family's murders had been captured. Dewey and the KBI investigators flew to Nevada to obtain a confession from the duo, and they finally apprehended them around 6 weeks following the tragic events. Smith and Hickok were transported from Nevada to Garden City, Kansas, where they underwent separate interrogations by Dewey and his investigative team. Although Smith mentioned in his confession that Hickok had killed Nancy and Bonnie, He later declined to sign the confession and expressed a desire to take responsibility for all 4 deaths out of sympathy for Hickok's parents, as they were elderly and in poor health. And he didn't want them to pass away thinking that their son was a killer. Hickok, on the other hand, consistently asserted that Smith was the one responsible for all 4 murders. Subsequently, Hickok and Smith were transported for trial in Finney County District Court for the murders. The trial drew a large public turnout. The third-floor courtroom, with a capacity of 160 people, quickly reached its limit, leading to many being turned away. Positioned at the forefront were members of the press, among them Truman Capote. Herb Clutter's surviving daughters, Beverly and Eviana, chose not to attend any sessions due to the harrowing nature of the proceedings. Conversely, Herbert's brother, Arthur Clutter, attended and expressed his intense emotions to reporters, stating, quote, "The way I feel I could tear them apart," unquote. Over the ensuing 3 days, prosecution witnesses were called to testify, including those who had discovered the bodies, law enforcement officials, and experts. Despite efforts by the defense to discredit some of the evidence, their options were limited. Following just 40 minutes of deliberation on March 29, 1960, an all-male jury found both defendants guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder, resulting in a death sentence. Subsequently, they were transferred to the Kansas State Penitentiary, where they spent the next 5 years on death row. They were hanged on April 14, 1965. The following were Smith's final words. Quote, "I think it is a hell of a thing that a life has to be taken in this manner. I say this especially because there's a great deal I could have offered society. I certainly think capital punishment is legally and morally wrong. Any apology for what I have done would be meaningless at this time. I don't have any animosities toward anyone involved in this matter. I think that is all." Unquote. Hickok, on the other hand, motioned for KBI agent Roy Church, who played a major role in the arrest of the 2 men, to come where he was standing and told him that he was being sent to a better place. Despite this, he harbored no bitterness towards Agent Roy Church and even bid him farewell with a handshake. As they awaited their execution, prayers were offered for both men by the chaplains present. Their final meals, eaten separately, consisted of spiced shrimp, French fries, garlic bread, ice cream, and strawberries with whipped cream. After hanging for 20 minutes, Hickok was the first to pass, declared deceased at 12:41 a.m., followed by Smith at 1:19 a.m. The state covered the burial expenses, but Smith's funeral was $250 less than Hickok's due to his military veteran status, making him eligible for a veteran's burial allowance. Both men were initially laid to rest on the prison grounds before being relocated to accommodate a prison expansion effort. They now rest in Section 34, Row 29 of Mount Muncie Cemetery in Leavenworth County, marked by modest gravestones. The original headstones, purchased by Truman Capote, were unfortunately stolen. Perry Edward Smith was 31 at the time of the murders, and 36 at the time of his execution. Richard Hickok was 28 at the time of the murders, and 33 at the time of his execution. Before the capture of the perpetrators, author Truman Capote became aware of the tragic Clutter family murders and chose to journey to Kansas to document the crime. Accompanied by his childhood friend and fellow writer, Harper Lee, they meticulously gathered information through interviews with local residents and investigators, amassing thousands of pages of notes. Capote dedicated 6 years to crafting his book. Upon its release in 1966, In Cold Blood swiftly gained popularity, becoming the second best-selling true crime publication in history, trailing only Vincent Bugliosi's 1974 work, Helter Skelter, which delved into the Charles Manson murders. Decades later, the remains of the suspected killers were exhumed from Mount Muncie Cemetery in Lansing. This was part of an effort by law enforcement to crack a 65-year-old cold case using DNA technology. The duo had previously been interrogated in relation to the shooting deaths of Cliff and Christine Walker and their 2 young children in Osprey, Florida, on December 19, 1959. Following the Clutter murders, Smith and Hickok had escaped to Florida. At the time of their apprehension in the Clutter case, a polygraph test had absolved them of the murder. However, according to contemporary polygraph standards, the results of their test are no longer deemed reliable. In December of 2012, Kansas officials exhumed the remains of Smith and Hickok, retrieving bone fragments. The aim was to compare their DNA with the semen discovered in Christine Walker's trousers. In August 2013, The Sheriff's Office of Sarasota County reported that they were unable to establish a DNA match between Perry Smith or Richard Hickok and the samples obtained from the Walker family murder case. The DNA samples retrieved were only partial, possibly due to degradation over the years or contamination during storage. This resulted in an inconclusive outcome, neither confirming nor refuting the involvement of Smith and Hickok. As a result, investigators maintain that Smith and Hickok are still the primary suspects. However, Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist at DeSales University, has expressed doubts about Smith and Hickok's involvement. Based on the personal items reported stolen, Ramsland suggests that the perpetrator may have been acquainted with at least one member of the Walker family. Notably, the Walker's stolen marriage certificate was found among items given to Cliff Walker's niece by a relative in 2013. This relative was subsequently exonerated through DNA testing. The case remains unsolved. In the wake of the tragic events that unfolded on that fateful night in 1959, the Clutter family massacre left an indelible mark on the small town of Holcomb and reverberated throughout the nation. The lives of Herbert and Bonnie Clutter, along with their children Nancy and Kenyon, were brutally taken by Perry Smith and Richard Hickok in an act of greed and senseless violence. The Clutter family, known for their integrity, kindness, and contributions to their community, was mourned by all who knew them, and by those who came to learn of their tragic fate through Truman Capote's hauntingly detailed account in his book In Cold Blood. The funeral, attended by a multitude, served as a testament to the impact the Clutters had on their town and beyond. The swift and just resolution of this case, with the conviction and subsequent execution of Smith and Hickok, provided a measure of closure to the grieving community. The legacy of the Clutter family will live on in the hearts of those who remember them